Welcome back to Sunrise. Today now we've got the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Mr. Kachikwu. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
I'd like to straight away just get your thoughts on what some of the headlines, one of them, which says sale of Nigerian crude oil threatened by discount pricing, U.S. shale boost. Is this a reality?
First, let me say that in terms of the marketing of Nigerian crude, NNPC takes direct responsibility for that. So, are there discounts being granted for those? Sometimes the contractual requirements require some discounts. If you have long-term buyers, the only reason why they remain long-term buyers is that you've structured some level of discounts into the pricing. But they're usually very insignificant pricing. Given the price of oil today, today I think at about 75, last week about 80, these discounts are fairly less than $2, $3. So if that is the price you need to pay for sustenance of a long-term certainty in terms of the market in a very sporadic competition, that's the nature of the trade. I do not have the specifics of what volumes of discounts have been granted. I don't think that the market is threatened by virtue of that. The market should be encouraged actually by virtue of that. People want to buy at a lower price if they can. What you might have as a reaction to that market is the nature of contracting. I think the point is, and I've made the points collectively, continuously, that we need to focus a little bit more on firmer markets. You see, the nature of oil global trade is changing. At the time when demand was beginning to outstrip supply, demand was supply was going to outstrip demand. What you found out was a lot of countries began to say, okay, who are my 5 to 6 primary purchasers? And they locked in that market, sometimes for as long as 5, 6 years, strategic arrangements. We've tended to do year-to-year crude term sales, albeit through a very hopefully transparent bidding process. But the truth is that if people have to make arrangements every year in terms of purchase, it sort of destabilizes the market equilibrium. What I'd like to see, and I've urged NNPC to look into that, and for the first time this year, they're doing a 2-year term contract, which is different from what has been done traditionally. But I think we should be looking at 5-year contracts.
It is interesting you say that is within the purview of the NNPC. I'm just a little curious, what is the relationship between the Ministry of Petroleum and the NNPC? Well,
we have 8 parastatals in the ministry, one of which, NNPC really isn't a parastatal in the true sense of the word. It is a commercial entity that is largely independent, run by a board. I'm chairman of the board. But you find that because of the fact that it produces over 90% of the resource of this country, there are lots of intervening forces that look into their operations. And bear in mind that the president is the Minister for Petroleum. So by virtue of that, there's a lot more direct reporting that sometimes takes place. The reality is, what we've tried to do is a balancing the powers of the president versus the power of the sitting minister who supervises them versus the power of the GMD versus the power of the board. You can see straight in that equation, there are 4 configurations. There are a bit more. There's the assembly. There are the governors who are interested through the FAC process, So there's a huge, unlike probably most of your everyday parastatals, NNPC gets quite a lot of scrutiny. As it should, and nothing wrong with that.
But then that looks as if there's so much of dark waters around the petroleum ministry. Now, if all of these eyes are looking into what's going on, how is it that it's so dark in there?
There's nothing dark about it. The truth is that I think Nigerians do a lot of tales out of the functions of NNPC. When I became GMD, the first thing that we did was begin to publish the books of NNPC on a monthly basis. The effect of that was that even if the reports were bad in the sense of performance, actual profit and loss performance, but people at least knew what was going on. That practice, I think, has held on to today. NNPC has gone through, at least in my 3 years, as minister, NNPC has gone through probably about 3 to 4 forensic audits by well-reputed international auditing agencies for purpose of determining what are the gaps, what are the monies owed to the government, what is the performance level, so that the cost items per barrel. So, quite frankly, we've looked at this every which way you can. And I've encouraged NNPC to open their books. Anybody who wants to come look, let them look. The reality is that we have a difficult situation in our hands, and I think that's what creates the anger amongst Nigerians, understandably. You have a situation, for example, where today the landing costs of downstream products is more than the sale price of downstream products. The only way you can do that, there are only 2 ways you can do, only 3 ways you can do with that. Either you go back and begin to do the subsidy that we quite frankly took away within a few months of my coming in because I thought it was not opaque at the time. Or you go back and, quite frankly, budget for it and go through a proper process through the assembly of creating funds to deal with that. Or NNPC takes it on as this bulwark of the nation's stabilization agency and begins to fund that. Then, of course, it hits its P&L. Yeah. So those are the three mechanisms under which you can deal with it. But the problem is there. The problem isn't caused by NNPC in a real sense. The price of oil, on one hand, as minister, I wear two twin arms. I'm pushing very hard for the price of oil to keep going up, and that's one of the works that we do in OPEC. But each time it goes up, of course, it impacts on the price at which you import petroleum products. So until our refineries, quite frankly, are back on stream, doing well, or for that matter, the private sector invests sufficiently in owning private refineries, you're going to continue to have this sort of distortion. And that's what creates a lot of... You don't hear people complain a lot about, upstream. But you hear people complain a lot about downstream, because that is what affects people day to day. They go to pump, they buy their fuel, they see the prices go up or down, that sort of stuff. A lot of Nigerian contractors, I was probably say about 40, 50, maybe 60% of Nigerian contractors who play in this field are downstream, so there's a lot more attention, there's a lot more worry.
If I could jump in a bit, pardon me, to follow up on what you talked about in terms of the pricing. If the landing cost is 171, as the GMD of NNPC says, and if we sell at 145, clearly there's a differential. Who pays that?
Well, right now, NNPC is importing most of the products because private marketers have basically left the importation environment. It's too much of a loss factor for them. So the government pays that one way or the other. Obviously, NNPC
so is that subsidy?
Well, what NNPC has called is under recovery, and that's because when you use subsidy term, when you actually set up a process that goes through a regulatory approval, to be able to pay people back money as to cover or cushion their loss. However, if a company is doing it, what it does is it says, if I bring in a product, am I recovering enough? Or am I under-recovering? In real sense, you may call it verbal semantics. It comes down to the same thing. It depends on who does it. But the reality is, for a company, it is an under-recovery bid. Under-recovery because you may well lose money in terms of the actual importation, but then you probably will make money in other areas and maybe you'll still pushing it. So when you look at your P&L, you may not be able to take the full impact or full heat of the 100% of